Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the sales webinar series here at Ball State University Center for Professional Selling. I'm the director, Deva Rangarajan, and I'm also the host of this webinar. Today, we have two very smart people who are going to come and share with us some very nice insights about this new frontline role, new to us, but for them, they have been living this for quite some time. And that is called the Customer Success Manager, right? And this is a new term that is being used in many organizations which realize that traditional sales roles, traditional frontline roles are not sufficient if you need to keep your B2B customers satisfied, have a good experience, and come back and continue to do business with you. So we have Ruben Rabago, who is a chief strategist and one of the co-authors of this wonderful book called the Customer Success Professional Handbook. And we also have Ashvin Vaidyanathan, who is the Chief Customer Officer, and both of them work for one of the biggest customer success platform companies called Gainsight. Gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to talk to our audience.
Thank you so much for having us. It's an absolute pleasure.
Indeed. So before I begin, so essentially tell us a little bit more about Gainsight and what does Gainsight do and what is the origins of Gainsight and what is it that is some of the values that you provide to your customers.
Ashvin, would you like me to take that or you want to go for it?
Please go for it.
Oh, so we are a venture-backed company, about 700 person. Essentially, we build software that helps companies scale and operationalize customer success. And we've been very fortunate to work with a kind of who's who in the technology world. There's a lot of small, fast-growing private equity companies, but we also serve a lot of late stage and public companies. And it's afforded us a really very broad spectrum of businesses that we've been able to engage with that are moving customer success forward and really scaling it. And, what we've also seen is that customer success isn't just about technology. And of course, we believe Gainsight has the best, and it certainly is the best platform out there. But it's also about best practices. It's around organizational design processes. Gainsight wrote the very first book on customer success. Became very popular, is translated into several languages. That was really the why for customer success. And the imperative, which sort of led us to write the second one, which is the how-to, which is really intended for the CS executive and the leader and the practitioner.
And if I would ask Ashwin, what were some of the learnings that you took away when you wrote this book?
Yeah, it's a great question. For us, like the biggest learnings, I'll give you some in jest and some in seriousness. Some in jest is like, it's probably the toughest thing I've ever done in my life because I can think in bullets, I can think in topics, but it's very hard to actually write it in prose and keep a constant message and storyline throughout a multi-page book. So very different than writing blogs, which I'm used to, but writing a book is a completely different ballgame. So definitely struggled with it and also learned the skill the tough way and a lot of weekends and time away from family, which was really hard to actually make it happen. The positive is this was a really, like, the one thing I'll say is having been in the customer success community for the last 5 or 6 years being at Gainsight, this community feeds off of itself. And the only reason one of the big reasons it's growing so well is because there is a sense of camaraderie, a sense of community across the practitioners in this industry. And people want to give back all the time. This was Ruben's and my way of giving back the last 5 or 6 years to the learnings so that folks starting now don't have to go through the same ramp and the same learning curve that we had to go through. So a little something from us back to the community to keep feeding the monster.
I think you're right. I think you said finally when you said feeding the monster, but it's one of the nice Cookie Monster kind of stuff, because
Yes.
I really think that it's one of those things where I remember I was talking to Ruben about when I first came across the term customer success was actually 3-4 years ago when I was there actually doing a training for a bunch of sales managers. And I had this one lone person whose title was customer success manager. And I started rolling my eyes saying, okay, this is another fancy word for a key account manager. And it was through that where we then starting to talk to this person that we started to understand that, hey, there's a lot of nuances to this role. And initially it began as nuances, but then it began to understand, oh my God, this role can actually hold its own, should hold its own, and is going to be critical in, you should bear with me on this. I'm still a sales professor. It is a huge part of the sales enablement efforts, because what you have is a sales organization which today does not have the time to go back and follow up with its customers, whereas the customer success role is going to be critical in this day and age where if you're not protected by intellectual intellectual patents or intellectual property, it's going to be very easy for the customers to defect. And I think that's one of the things you also mentioned again in this book. So I would like to also point out to this book, which is again a great book, which is actually a follow-up from another book on customer success by Dan Steinman. But for me, this book is also wonderful because it actually tells how to go about planning. I can easily see this as a book for both customer success people or managers who are looking into this as a career, but it can also be for organizations that are thinking about setting up a customer success function or department in their organization, and how would they go about dealing with it. Am I right in understanding the kind of way you structured your book?
Yes. I think I'll yes and what you said. It's everything that you said, but we actually preach to the industry that customer success is more of a mindset and a company-wide transformation that you need to take. So some companies could choose to start a separate customer success organization or a department. Other companies could say, actually, I want some of these processes to be done across different existing functions, right? And so sales should do X, Y, and Z that are customer-centric. Finance teams should do X, Y, and Z that are customer-centric, etc. So what we try to do in the book is not focus on CSM as a profession or like as a department, but more as here are the processes and the mindset that you need to shift within your company. You could choose to put all of that in one team that does like 80% of the heavy lifting, like a lot of born in the cloud companies already do. Or you could just disperse these processes across multiple departments in your company. But the book tries to answer both approaches.
I love it because I remember this was way back in 2002, 2003 when I was finishing up a PhD. At that time, the buzzword was CRM. And essentially at that point in time, and I'll get to that question later on in our interview as well, is the idea of CRM where we said was CRM should be seen as a philosophy in a firm rather than just a tool. So fast forward 18 years in your book, and I'm possibly getting the same feeling that, yes, for those organizations which have a very clear philosophy of taking care of my customers, not having a customer success department would mean that here we have another department to help us look at our mandate of taking care of our customers. That should be the approach. Whereas an organization just saying, hey, we don't necessarily have a complete strategy or view of what we want to do with our customers, then they're less likely to find success with these kind of roles, and they're in for a lot of heartburn because they're going to sink in a lot of resources and not necessarily get the returns that they would like to. Am I right in understanding this as well?
No, so the one thing that we have seen most certainly is, early in the stages with this profession and this movement, it did start as a small team. And it was very much, honestly, in response to what was a retention issue. But as customer success became holistic, and really to Ashvin's original point, was an imperative sort of company top down. We have seen a marketed difference, and even from a data perspective, in KPIs, in metrics, and financial performance between companies that sort of leave it at that very tactical, departmental, almost CSM level versus companies that have taken a very holistic approach all the way from marketing and sales, full stream, when an entire company flips on the end and puts the customer success as the primary objective, the numbers report significantly in that maturation of a company that is all in, top down, versus a company that's still sort of behaving it and treating customer success as a pet project, or as what we call like an art project, right? So absolutely, to our point is the book and the intention very much talks about the actual behaviors and tactics and things to that effect. But it should not necessarily be singularly conceived as an individual function. These are multiple functions that could be spread throughout.
I think what you're saying is wonderful, that both of you, because I think we can actually dive into the book. Because when I was looking at the book, when I was going through the book and everything else, what I really like about it is how you've actually structured it into 4 parts, right? And I read it from the viewpoint of trying to set everybody the idea that, hey, listen, this is where customer success, the kind of the origins of customer success and what it means for you. Then the part 2 would be like, what does it mean for you to have it as a career and how do you go about dealing with it? And then the part 3 would be much more about what are the typical day-to-day activities that you would expect a customer success professional to be doing. But I like the idea that when you do all this, all the things, you have to have one level above, which says that this is all done with the intention of taking care of our customers. And I like the way you finish it off with saying, okay, what does it mean to have and foster a team-based approach towards customer success? And I think with that in mind, what I would like to do is that there are some specific questions that I would like to ask both of you as well. And I'm going to begin with each chapter. So essentially what caught my eye, and then I immediately went to that particular page and I did the old fashioned way of bookmarking it. So there you go. So I'm looking at chapter 1, where you talk about the fact that this is the birth of a new profession. And I'm assuming that, yes, in your world of SaaS and born in the cloud companies, that people know what customer success is, but in other domains, it's still something which is seen as a new profession, right? And you talk about it as a missing critical function. Tell me a little bit more about what do you mean by that? And this could be for anyone. I'll probably begin with Ruben. So maybe and then we can ask Ashvin for the next one as well.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. So the truth is, right, if we were to look at even a lot of companies today, look at marketing and their charter, right? Marketing's charter is demand gen. Sales charter is to close that demand gen, right? And then you move typically into implementation, professional services, and their objective is to get the customer live, typically under an SOW, and to close out that SOW as quick as they possibly can. And then traditionally, there's some mechanism of making sure that there's an account manager who's there to identify and to engage when there's a commercial transaction to be had, typically in an expansion or an upsell sort of motion. But it's transactional, right? And then you have support, of course, which is primarily focused on break fix, very rarely focused on the proactive work. And then, of course, you have sort of like overlays, your G&A, your finance team, which, invoicing, accounts payable, and those type of things. But there was no function that was fundamentally responsible for the health and the assurance, especially in the SaaS world, where you have to essentially resell that customer over and over and over again the aspects and the value of your solution on an annualized basis, typically, or even at an extreme on a month-to-month basis, which are some of these SaaS models. And so that functional gap was sort of the aspect of where every one of those traditional departments were very transactional, were very isolated. They had handoffs, but there was never one fundamental function that was responsible from initiation of being a customer all the way through to ensuring that ultimately the customer would stay a customer of yours and would be so successful that they would buy more stuff from you. That was the birth of the customer success role.
So wait, the way I'm reading this is that what you're saying is that you need to have a unicorn. from what I say, actually, that's a beautiful way of looking at it, because I look at what you're saying, I listen to what you're saying, is you're talking about a person who, if they are given the mandate, can actually try to pull in and work with different departments to help the customer, right? And the ultimate idea is to help the customer. And for me, it's almost like a unicorn, somebody who can play such a critical role. I say the word unicorn because I'm a father of 2 kids. So we have unicorns, or 2 girls. So we have unicorns all over the place. So that's pretty much what I'm getting a sense for as this individual, man. Ashwin, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, yeah. I was just going to add, like, I think on the people front, I don't know if unicorn is the right analogy, because we actually think the 3 skills that you need, the 3 big skills which we talk about in the book, those are all coachable skills. Yeah. You're blessed with some of them, nature versus nurture, but I think like a lot of them can actually be coached even in folks. So, and unfortunately, you can't coach someone into a horse into becoming a unicorn. So that's why I say the analogy is maybe like put a little cone on your forehead or something. But yes, we actually think it's all coachable skills, and so a very, very interesting profession that way. The other part I was going to add on is we also live in very interesting times in that traditional companies that are not born in the cloud are either creating cloud offerings, or they're acquiring companies, disruptors that are in the cloud. And if neither of those are true, their customers are definitely forcing them to create subscription offerings. You don't need to be in the cloud. You can be on-premise or on-site, but you still sell me such that I have the opportunity to share the risk with you, and I have the opportunity to back out if I don't get value from your product or service. So in general, it's the movement towards subscription is 100% happening across all industries. There are jet services now where you can have a subscription to a jet, basically. So, right. So every fixed asset is now subscriptionable. And hence, that's a trend that then forces the conversation of saying just selling is not enough. Maintaining value throughout the customer journey becomes important. And that's true even of the most industrial of industries, the most healthcare is getting disrupted with the exact same thing. So we're seeing that across the board, which hence we think the birth of a profession at this time makes appropriate.
And I like it because I think I do stand corrected. When I meant a unicorn, actually what I meant was not about them being born or not, but I really like what you're saying, because I am in the field of sales and I'm a huge believer that salespeople are made, not born. So you're following the same kind of analogy. And I'm sure that if at a later point in time, if we have the time, we can always talk about what kind of profiles make great customer success managers. And I'm sure that in your experience, you've seen people come from different backgrounds and different functions who suddenly have this kind of flair towards making sure that they can have that kind of conversations with customers, including building that internal networks. And essentially, then if they're coached the right way, I think that's one of the things which I really like. And what I really like is in this chapter, you actually set the stage for saying that, you know what, customer success is here to stay. And it is something that is a profession that you actually will make a huge impact, not only in your organization, but also in your customer's organization as well. And that's the key takeaway that I am thinking over and beyond just what I read in the chapter. So if I were to move along, if I were to move along to the next chapter, which is more about defining the customer success manager role. And here is one equation that you guys have, which I absolutely love. I love this equation that you have. It's the customer success equation, where you talk about the customer success is a combination of customer experience plus customer outcomes, right? Tell me a little bit more about that, because I see a lot of companies talk about customer experience, but is that alone enough for customer success?
Yeah. Do you want me to take that, Ruben?
Yes, please.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the general philosophy that we all believe in the CS community and at Gainsight for sure is what all of us are experiencing in our B2C lives. so working with the Amazon or a Lyft or an Uber is basically shaping our perceptions even in the business to business context. So taking a Lyft ride or an Uber ride from point A to point B, getting from point A to point B is the outcome that I want from that ride. If the driver plays music, if he or she is talking to me at 5 a.m. on my way to the airport when I don't want to be spoken to, those are like the experiences along that journey, if you think about it. And so I'm equating the same thing in our business to business world in terms of relationships. I buy software because I want that software to do something for me, which is the outcomes. And then I do enjoy my experiences with the different people that I work with from the company. The product brings a certain experience on a day-to-day basis. Do my teams enjoy and love working with that application or not, etc., is the experience. And so both of these are equally important as we think about delivering success to the customers. If you get outcomes, but you don't get the experience, then you are potentially going to continue the relationship at least for a year, but you might be tempted to go look at other alternatives, maybe smaller companies that deliver better experiences to you. If you only deliver experience and not the outcome, then you are in a world where you might continue the relationship for this year, but that's not a longer term thing because you're not getting value for money if you think about it that way. And if you get both, which is the great place to be, you're not only going to buy more from that vendor, you're actually going to go to your friends and family and your network and say, I actually love working with these guys and you should all be invested in this as well. So that's the general notion.
Absolutely. Ruben, you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think the summation is, customers aren't expecting just transactions anymore, right? That was the thing out of the 80s and the 90s. You'd buy one big, massive, sometimes $1 million solution. And you as a software vendor were laughing all the way to the bank to the next guy that would buy, your next big solution. And it was left to the customer ultimately to attain the success. And now, the economies have changed all of that, and the financing and everything else from that vantage point. And ultimately, you are buying as a customer results. Yeah. And if you aren't delivering results, also in a way that is delivered on a great experience, you are ultimately at risk. And sometimes that risk and that change is a mouse click away.
Indeed. Which is actually a question that I want to ask both of you. So why didn't you have it as customer success is equal to CX multiplied by CEO, saying that if any one of those goes wrong, you're not going to necessarily have customer success. So why did you specifically choose plus? I'm curious to see why that.
I actually have an answer for that. So it was an early assessment in the formula. We're sort of a nerdy kind of company, and I think that's correct. I think the answer is it is a multiple, right? You can't have a zero on either one because customer success will ultimately be zero. But Ashvin, I don't know if you have a better answer than that. I do know that from if we were to advance or to mature the formula, I would definitely change that to a multiplication sign.
Yeah, I don't know if we gave it that much thought from a mathematical standpoint, but I think there is merit to what you're saying. Like getting either of them right or both of them right actually has more impact than getting just one right. Makes total sense.
And then I think one of the things, and again, this is just the geek in me as well. So essentially what's going to happen is that depending upon the fact that it can still be an addition, but you could have a weighted sum. So for example, it could be that in B2B context, it could be that the customer outcomes where if you are a monopoly, you're a supplier who's a monopoly. So I don't have a choice. I'm not going to expect much in terms of customer experience because, hey, take it from us or leave it. You know what I mean? If I'm a supplier and I'm a monopoly, I don't really need to take care about the kind of customer. So the customer also varies what their idea of customer success based on that. But I really like this idea that you can try and work on this. Plus, either way, for the first time, again, I'll be very honest. I think when they first came up with the Net Promoter Score, I was not necessarily a very big fan. I know, Ashvin, you work for McKinsey, so it's from Bain, so it's okay, right? I can always diss Bain, right? So essentially, from that perspective, but the fact is that the NPS is great. You're a great company to work with. I like the people I'm talking to and everything else, but if you're not delivering on your promises, because I am answerable, I'm talking from the viewpoint of the customer, I'm answerable to the decisions that I've made to work with you. So if you're not able to help me help myself, then it's going to be a lot harder. And that's what I really like about that as well. So what I'll do is that
Totally makes sense. And I'll call out one, I'll call out one thing, which is NPS is like, not to diss on it too much, but it was created with the B2C context in mind, where the buyer and the user are the same person in most cases. Yeah. Whereas in a B2B context, you are selling into IT, your users are in a line of business who roll up into a GM who has a different decision-making mindset. Then there is the CEO and a CFO who have completely different points of view. So there's not one stakeholder to manage, hence, like, NPS is not enough in that context.
I've actually seen how it is deployed, because I've actually seen deployed in B2B companies as a transactional NPS and a relational NPS. So the idea is that anytime the customer has an issue, it is taken in by the members of the decision-making unit who are specifically have that issue. And after every transaction, just like at the car dealership, you get a satisfaction survey immediately after that. Whereas a relational NPS is where you look at the key decision makers who worked on it and you do it on a yearly basis. So I've actually seen NPS put to practice, but my dissing of NPS actually comes from an academic perspective where a difference is not necessarily enough. So there's a big change. There's a big sort of people calling the American Customer Satisfaction Index. They do a much better job of mapping out customer satisfaction indices as an indication. But again, as I said, but I really like the idea that experience alone is not enough. Ruben, I interrupted you as well.
No, I was just going to sort of reflect back to the formula in general, which of course, satisfaction and experience are one of them. But there's a subtlety that I sort of like want to call out. And we didn't necessarily highlight it significantly in the book, but certainly in this downturn that we're experiencing right now, there is something that's super important that isn't part of that formula. And that's your own company success, right? So you can't necessarily deliver customer success at any expense. You have to be there's the stakeholder and the shareholder that has to be balanced appropriately. Because if you don't find a mechanism to be successful as a business delivering customer success, then you won't have the opportunity to deliver customer success for the next customer. Absolutely. So, I think it's super important, and this pressures that we're all experiencing right now in business is actually highlighting the intensity to really focus on your existing customers in a way that we have probably never seen it before in business. And so, there's a couple of paragraphs to sort of talk about this, but I just wanted to elevate that to the conversation.
Absolutely. And I love this conversation, because if you're doing the right thing, it's going to come back to help you. Because every time a customer says, I had a great experience and they did a fantastic job, it's going to make your cost of acquisition lower with newer customers. So the cost of sale is actually going to go down, because you're going to have positive word of mouth. And that is something that you can easily take away. Not to mention, a happy customer is a customer who's going to actually give you more business, is going to give you more ideas to co-create. So that is typically what in geek words we call value for the customer and value of the customer. So while I'm creating value for the customer, I'm creating value for my own organization, because I'm getting reduced cost of sale. I'm getting possible beta testers for my new innovations. I can actually co-create and get ideas based on knowing the customer's outcomes. And I think that's something that I think is really cool that you mentioned that as well, that it's not always about outcomes for the customer, but you also work for your organizations, and we have to create outcomes for our own organization as well. So moving along, and I think this goes back to Ashwin's point, and he was right in calling me out about the core competencies. I think I like when you take a look at a day in the life of a customer success manager, and specifically the core skills. And I really liked the 3 core competencies. So Can you shed some more light on the three core competencies of customer success manager, please?
Yeah, happy to. And I'll tell you also, like, I think you were alluding to this earlier, which is like what makes for a great CSM as well. And so the three core competencies that we generally observe in the industry is one around capability or like mastering of your industries that you serve into. So this is not only knowing your product inside out and how that differentiates versus competition, what use cases, customer stories do you know, etc. But also if your product is very industry specific, or you work with a certain set of or types of companies, for example, people sell into healthcare all the time, knowing that industry inside out, what new legal ramifications are they going through in these times, like what does COVID mean for education tech companies? Like if you don't have an online virtual offering at this point as an education establishment, you're host, right? So like what does all of that mean is what I call as the mastering of your industry skill set. Then the second one is like almost creative problem solving. So, right, like especially folks who've had some exposure to being in consulting industries or product management, etc., they naturally run into 10,000 different problems trying to solve one problem. So how can you structure it such that you address the highest impact ones first and then go down the list, and being more structured about your problem solving capabilities? That's the second one. And then the third one is, this is a natural one that comes to a lot of people who are interested in a CSM profession, is empathy and relationship building skills with people. Sales has a lot of this in that profession as well. And so those are the three that I generally see as the core competencies or skill sets. What I've noticed is, like generally, if you're a really good CSM, you tend to have all of these three things, at least as an average skill set. The greatest CSMs in my mind are the people who master the product and the industry competency really well. And so if you can invest time in learning your product inside out and be the expert in the room, you have so much more credibility in customer conversations than any other thing that you could do. So that was a quick gist. You're on mute, I think, Deva.
Yeah, so I'm not as skilled in all this as the industry folks are. So Ruben, actually building up on what Ashvin said, where do you put the networking capabilities? Because I think, you can do all this, but you need, for lack of a better word, you say you need a village to raise a child. So for a customer success manager to be able to do his or her job or their job, you also need to build that network, because you do talk about networking later on. But how much of the network should be also built internally? Because from our experience in sales, we say that it's much harder to sell internally than to get buy-in from the customer. So what are your thoughts on that competency? Is it part of the three that you have, or would it something?
Yeah, it is definitely part of the three. And one of the other thing that, we have noticed just in terms of progression and this maturing of this profession is there are now becoming like specialists. You don't necessarily have to be an extrovert to be successful. You can be like a super data-oriented operational person, and there's going to be a functional role in customer success for that kind of personality, that kind of mindset, and those kind of skills that sort of favor almost an internally focused, operational driven function. And those could manifest as a CSM that never actually talks live to a customer, but manages a portfolio of maybe 500 different customers, and they manage it all through automation and email and outreach and sort of tech touch, right? But nonetheless, to your question, ultimately it does come down to internally, are you able to properly build a resource pool first immediately with your own CSM resources, which obviously should be a reflection of the leadership itself. But you have to be really, really good at engaging with the sales team, with the marketing team, with product, probably more so than ever before. The relationship between product and customer success is so incredibly critical, that your relationship and your respect to their time and effort. I'll just give you like one tactical example. Like as a CSM, your response to your customer shouldn't be, well, you know what? You're right. The product doesn't do that. Let me go and let's open up an enhancement request. That should not be your first response. The first response is, first of all, to Ashwin's point, you should be so familiar with the capabilities of the product that maybe the customer is doing something that is within the framework of the product. And so you have to have that capability understanding of what is capable and what is not, to be able to breeze that conversation and really deflect the things that come into product. And then secondarily, immediately start thinking about workarounds within the product set. Go into your team and say, hey, has anybody run into this use case? And your last resort is to go to product, because they have a product life cycle and a roadmap that they are trying to go after.
Indeed.
Ashvin, any additional comments that you might have around that?
No, I think you covered it
Indeed.
really well, Ruben.
Indeed. Actually, you sort of, one of the chapters and one of the things you have, which I really like, was how do you network with industry experts and build your network as well. So essentially, you sort of answered that question both internally and externally. I want to take one of the things which I really like, one of the things you have in the chapter, that is the last chapter in your core skills of a CSM, is you talk about stay focused and positive when situations are difficult. I know that when you wrote the book, you were not thinking of COVID, but given the fact that we're having COVID right now, I think the learnings from that particular thing are going to be more relevant than anything at all. So tell me a little bit more about how would a CSM, to be honest, your findings is going to be true for every frontline role actually. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about how do I stay focused and positive when situations are difficult.
I'm going to let Ashvin take this one, because he's managing just on a very personal level, a large team of customer success managers. So I'd love to hear your messaging to them,
Yes.
and share out what you're conveying and what you're hearing from the Gainsight
totally.
CSM team.
I think some of this is like CS leaders don't have to try exceptionally hard to do this, thankfully, because people who are interested in the profession are in this not for short-term customer goals, like closing deals, etc., but they're invested in the long-term success of customers, which would mean there are near-term impacts to the business in lieu of long-term benefits, right? So most CSMs are coming at this saying, if we do the right thing by customers and maybe give them 2 months free on the contract, I'm making that up, as companies deal with the COVID crisis, then in the longer run, that relationship is going to be that much stronger. In the longer run, they're more likely to invest more energies into making the software and adoption work and all of that good stuff. And so most CSMs are coming at it from that mindset. The single biggest thing that CS leaders can do to enable that is obviously, one, keep a very positive spirit and motivate the troops, because it is very hard to stay positive when everything around you is just crumbling down, right? Like, so in the situation that we are in. So keeping that positive spirit, sharing, even in this environment, like Zoom as a company and a stock is doing exceptionally well. There are certain pockets of businesses that are doing really well and helping the economy and helping people who need their products and services at this point. So let's also talk about the positives that are going on and companies that are doing well and customers that are doing really well in this situation. So don't just dwell on the negative. And then the second biggest thing that we can do as leaders is make sure that the metrics that you measure the team on is changing with the times. If you measure the team currently on making sure that the renewal is coming in this quarter, like that's a bad measure then you're going to incent all the wrong behavior in the team. You have to, this is the time to play the long game, not the in-quarter game, right? So, so that's the other thing that we should be doing as a CS profession.
If I could add, Ashvin, the other thing that I love how you explain it, is sort of the purpose to like what we do as a CS organization, is not viewing customers as a logo, right? These are people, right? companies and customers are made up of a collection of individuals. And, you know, the CSMs are engaging at a very, very human level. And what we say is, right, very often we're conditioned in business, you know, to be sort of aggressive and put sort of the emotion aside. And, you know, it's just business, don't take it personal. You know, we have this belief that you can win in business by being human first. And that it is a very personal engagement. And so it is our business to engage in a way that is lifting and edifying, because from a professional perspective, I think it's awesome that as a CSM, you get to literally help individuals attain success. On an individual perspective, you're helping attain that leader at your companies, their KPIs that they're going to go get rewarded on, and ultimately you're going to help them and their company elevate, which is helping their customers elevate. So it's like this altruistic sort of motion.
Well, yeah. So I'm not muted. So absolutely. And I think that's something that I really like. And I also like what Ashvin said. And I think that's also key is also how you set the KPIs, because at the end of the day it's going to be critical the way they behave. Yeah, you can do all this, but I can do all this. I can talk about strategy. I can talk about taking care of my customers, but if it's also not reflected in the way I am going to be evaluated, I think that you have to have that hand in hand. You need to have a vision. You need to have an idea about what the customer means to us and why customer success is critical to us. It goes back to the earlier point that both of you made. It's got to do with how we want to take care of our customers as a philosophy, as a strategy within a firm, but it should also be reflected in the way you evaluate and take care of your customer success or any frontline employee. Because failure to do that, I always give the bad example of Wells Fargo for whatever happened in terms of making sure that on the outer line, you say we want to take care of our customers, but all of your KPIs to the front line was not necessarily in line with that. So you ended up having some of the situations. I really like your nuanced answer to that. So with this, we come to the conclusion of the first part of the webinar, where we have one half of the book. So for those of you interested, stay tuned, because we'll have part 2 of the webinar where there are more useful nuggets. It looks like we just don't have nuggets. We actually have huge pieces of wonderful insights coming in from Ruben as well as Ashvin. So Ruben, Ashvin, thank you again for talking to us.